We're going to begin our program. I would like to welcome everyone to, well, I'd like to first welcome everyone out of the hotel, which I know is a novel experience for all of us since we've been getting a little bit of cabin fever the last few days at the Francis Marion in the rain. And I know we're all taking our seats. Okay. Thank you. Welcome everyone to the cigar factory. Hello. We need your attention. We've got so much we've got to do tonight, so we need to get started. Great. All right. First of all, hello. I was trying to get it out. I could bang it on the thing. Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. This is exciting for all of us, well, for anyone from Charleston to actually be here in this cigar factory tonight. I think that there's been some history, was in some of your pamphlets and things earlier this week. So, but this has been a property that stood vacant for a long time. And it has now been transformed over the past couple of years into one of the great new office and retail spaces in the city of Charleston. Overlooks the port, which we heard about earlier today. And I'm just glad to be able to show you a little bit of Charleston, even if it's just this little bit. We are here today because of the generosity of Garden Gun Magazine, who helped organize this event and whose offices are just across the way in the other end of the building. We were going to have a cocktail party in the actual offices of Garden & Gun tonight, but that wasn't able to happen because we've got too much to condense into one evening. But briefly, Garden & Gun is a magazine that I started with a partner and with my company, with Evening Post Industries, back at the worst possible time to start any business in 2007. Somehow, Garden & Gun came through the recession as perhaps or arguably the strongest magazine in the country today. A lot of that has to do with the tremendous staff that was put together by my partner and our CEO, Rebecca Darwin, who I don't believe is here yet. And a great editorial staff led by David DiBenedetto and endless other people. But I'd also like to thank Mather Economics, who has assisted with sponsoring this reception this evening, and we'd like to thank Matt Lindsay and our guests from Mather for their support. So I'd like to ask you to raise a glass to both Mather and to Matt and to Garden & Gun, and here's to you. Thank you very much for putting this together for us tonight. You cannot understand how well received it is for 300 people that have been sitting in the Francis Marion Hotel for the last 4 days. I'd be remiss if I didn't specifically thank Hunter Floyd of Garden & Gun, who really did all of the hard work on this putting this all together, as well as our team from Evening Post Industries. We thought that this would all be over, all of the planning and organization would be over as of Friday when everything began, but as you all know, that's when the real work really began, because we had to reorganize everything due to cancellations. Okay, and now, I'd like to introduce a man who really needs no introduction whatsoever. He has been a tremendous inspiration to me, a mentor, a friend, a family friend, multi-generational family friend, and he is perhaps, all I can say is, I guess, the personification of what IAPA really stands for, and that is the defense of freedom of expression in the Americas. For he has lived it on a level that very few others have, that have lived and have survived to tell the story about it. That is Bob Cox.
Well, thank you, Pierre. Y muchas gracias por venir a todos, ¿no? Gracias por su paciencia y su coraje. When I was asked to do this, I suggested that the title might be Journalism in a Time of Terror. It wasn't accepted. And I saw that on the program it was the Cox story. Well, this isn't the Cox story. This is the story of the Manigault family. It's the story of the SEEP, IAPA. We tend to call IAPA the SEEP, it's so much shorter. And the fight for freedom of expression and the fight for democracy. And everything comes together tonight because it's in 1982 that, again, the Post and Courier, the Manigault family, invited a group of journalists down from Argentina coming out of the dictatorship. One was Manfred Schonfield, an incredibly brave journalist who worked for La Prensa, and La Prensa means a lot to La CIP, to IAPA, the great newspaper, one of the greatest newspapers in the world, which was destroyed by Perón, destroyed by a dictatorship. And Manfred, when he came here, went back and was beaten up, terribly badly beaten up. I remember him so well because he was the first journalist, Argentine journalist, to break the silence. Our little newspaper, which continued thanks to the people of Charleston and thanks to the support of the IAPA, which was steadfast in support of democracy, in support of freedom of the press. But Manfred Schonfield was the correspondent in Spain, where he did a wonderful interview with Borges, and Borges actually told him something. Borges was somebody that I used to go and see every so often, Jorge Luis Borges, one of the greatest men of all time, I think. I've never met anybody that I've loved more, apart from my family and friends, as Jorge Luis Borges. To me, it was a wonderful thing to see him and to really enjoy his company and to tell him what was going on. He was blind, he didn't know. He told Manfred Schonfield what was going on. Manfred Schonfield goes back to Argentina, writes a story, and from then on he's a marked man. And the Manigault family brought him here, along with James Nielsen, very brave editorial writer on the Herald, and they came and told the story of what was happening. But even before that, the IAPA came to our rescue. And this is where Edward comes in. Again, another family. This is the Seaton family. We're all families here in IAPA. It's one of the greatest things about it. I haven't been able to come so often as I would have liked to have done, but when I come back, I feel that I'm back in the family again. It's a family that I will never leave. And I would just like to pass this over to Edward. He is, well, I'm going to praise everybody tonight, but it's a bit difficult because Edward has been so marvelous throughout all the years working for IAPA. He just works and works and works, writes it all down. Tremendously distinguished career on the Pulitzer board. I met him when he was on the Mary Moore's Cabot board. Where isn't Edward? Wherever things need to be done. And he's just a superb journalist. The other thing that I'm learning recently is that when newspapers are closing down, Edward is opening them up. I don't know how many, but I think he's expanding it. He's showing that good journalism never dies. Good journalism does not die. It can be destroyed, yes, but that's why we have to defend the media from dictators of every kind, every stripe. And of course, that's what unites us, that we all believe in freedom of the press, we believe in democracy, and that brings us together whether we're on the right, the left, or in the middle. Edward, I'd like you to tell us about your trip to Argentina in those very terrible years.
Bob, you were very, very generous in your statement. In the summer of 1978, Raoul Kreiselberg, who most of you know and whose son is here now, asked that IAPA send a mission to Argentina to investigate the difficulties that journalism was having in the midst of the dirty war, which had started 2 years earlier. I was asked by Argentina Hills, who that year was the president of IAPA, to go on that mission. I was joined by Ignacio Lozano, who then was the publisher of the paper, the La Opinión in Los Angeles. Later reports confirmed that 93 journalists were among the 13,000 people who had disappeared, the desaparecidos. Our report that Nacho and I made got a great deal of attention, including certainly at the IAPA meeting itself, and specifically with some very critical Argentines who didn't like what we had to say. I think part of that was that we supported or tried to support Jacobo Timmerman, who was a very innovative but very, very controversial publisher of the paper La Opinión in Buenos Aires. He had been tried and convicted and acquitted in a military court, but the dictators did not let him out, so he was held. Some of you may know that later he wrote a widely acclaimed book called Prisoner Without a Name, Cell Without a Number, which essentially exposed I'll call it the hypocrisy of what was going on in the secret world that was being maintained by the dictators in Argentina. When we issued that report, at that assembly, the assembly voted to give the grand prize of freedom of the press to, and I'll quote, the dead, disappeared, and jailed Argentine journalists, victims of those who want to restrict the exercise of free expression. That prize was in fact rejected by the Argentine Publishers Association, which just shows you how controversial all this was at that time. And the prize was essentially returned. To set the scene of what it was like in those days, I want to read an abbreviated version of the report that Nacho and I gave to that same General Assembly, which was held in Miami. And I quote as follows. This is from our report. The press in Argentina faces an extremely complex set of forces which the IAPA Special Mission attempted to sort through in only a week's time. The resulting picture reflects this complexity. It is a profile of a desperate group of journalists writing and editing in extremely difficult conditions. The most surprising facet of the profile is that for the most part, the press of Argentina accepts the rules of censorship imposed directly or indirectly by the military government. Our mission was routinely confronted with the view that Argentina, to quote one editor, quote, is enjoying complete freedom of the press given the circumstances. On certain themes, those of the most importance to the military government, there are limits. No one can define the boundaries with confidence, but that they exist and can be articulated in general terms is a matter of complete agreement. How editors and publishers view the government guidelines and the nature of the other pressures on them can be appreciated only in the perspective of the events that brought the country and its press to their present state. Virtually all of the more than 6 persons interviewed by the IAPA mission characterized the experience of the last 5 years in Argentina as conditions of war. Terrorism had become so rampant by the March 1976 military coup, they said, that the country approached a state of anarchy. Guerrillas virtually controlled certain geographic regions, including territory not far from Buenos Aires, and had become so strong that for short periods they could take over wealthy neighborhoods in the capital city itself. Officials in business and industry were being assassinated simply because of their positions. Kidnappings had generated enormous sums, estimated at from $200 million to $600 million, that kept the terrorists going. One newspaper publisher, a member of IAPA's board of directors, told them of moving the family members into the newspaper's plant for several months because security could not be maintained at their private residence. People became so insensitive to death, assassination, and kidnapping, according to several editors, that the country reached the brink of savagery. The court system virtually collapsed because terrorists had such power that judges refused to convict guerrillas for fear of being assassinated themselves. Most sources contacted by IAPA's mission believed that ultimately the country would have succumbed to the guerrilla elements had the military not intervened. Opinions about what has taken place since the military overthrew the popularly elected Perón government, however, are not so uniform. The military government openly launched a campaign to break the back of the terrorist movement. It picked up, often without charge, suspected terrorists and subversives. Such persons are said by Argentines to have disappeared. In May, La Prensa, the newspaper of IAPA board member Maximo Gainza, published a paid advertisement on behalf of the Argentine Permanent Assembly of Human Rights that lists 2,500 persons who have disappeared since the military junta took power. The assembly was readying another list of 500 for publication as we visited the country. In all of these cases, some sort of legal documentation, such as a habeas corpus request, had been made. Among the disappeared are a large number of persons who have, at one time or another, had some connection with the profession of journalism. More than 60 publications were closed or temporarily suspended, including both from the left and the right. Censorship in Argentina, however, is not so much a result of this decree as it is self-censorship as an outgrowth of fear. Fear of personal harm, fear of being closed down or another official penalty, and fear of undermining moderate elements in the government who want to return to democracy. Editors also must contend with the possibility of official reprisals by elements of the military acting without higher authority. One journalist called this phenomenon government hoodlumism. In addition, they have to fear reprisals from terrorist groups entirely outside the government. It is as if one were living out a novel of Franz Kafka. People die, people disappear, then reappear. Midnight kidnappings by persons dressed in civilian clothes sometimes result in the arrest acknowledged later by authorities, but in many of these cases, no such acknowledgement comes, yet the police won't investigate. Several knowledgeable journalists told our mission they believe the government itself is not trying to persecute journalists. Their suspicion is that lower-ranking military officials may be acting on their own in these instances. Our sources said that the top military leaders are unable to control their inferiors in a number of cases, and that in truth, Argentina is being run by the equivalent of 7 or 8 governments rather than one. In addition, some assassinations and kidnappings may still be the responsibility of leftist terrorists, they say. An important kidnapping today would be reported, we were told. Yet most newspapers ignore most kidnappings. Few were willing, for example, to cover the disappearance of 10 leaders of the so-called Mad Mothers who gather in front of the president's residence on Thursdays to call attention to the missing relatives. Publishing a terrorist communique also clearly still is off limits, and aiding or abetting subversive activities would bring serious repercussions. The reason one publisher expressed about a very recent kidnapping of a journalist is that if I publish the facts of that case as I know them, I will disappear. Stories on kidnappings and subversive activities are being run routinely only by a few newspapers. Most publishers interviewed by our mission excuse themselves from the need to run stories on persons who disappear with statements like the following: "They are not news. They are like fender benders in your country." The editor who said this carried stories the same day in his newspaper on assassinations and hijackings abroad. Other editors and publishers said they don't carry violence because they agree with the government's campaign against terrorism and they are going to cooperate. Such restraint could be seen when a large Buenos Aires daily had a bomb planted in its own newspaper plant the day of the World Cup Soccer Championship in June, but did not run a story. When a bomb went off in the Buenos Aires Herald building, the only Buenos Aires paper to cover that incident was the Herald itself. One notable exception to the absence of coverage of these crimes is the Buenos Aires Herald, the bold little David that received the Bergenthaler Award for Freedom of the Press at our last meeting. That would be the 1977 General Assembly. The grim picture seen by our mission is not without encouraging signs, including assurances of no more closings of newspapers and government officials' statements that the war on subversives is winding down. But we cannot feel good about a country where leading newspaper editors say that national security comes ahead of freedom of expression, as many Argentine editors do today. That is the end of my report, and we're going to show you this film that's being made about Bob, who in fact was then a British citizen, Bob Cox, who risked his life repeatedly standing up in his adopted country, almost alone, against the violence of the left and the right. And now Bob will introduce, I think, the man who's making the movie and perhaps tell you a few things.
That report, which was marvelous, should have been published in Argentina. Of course, it wasn't. And so most people in Argentina did not know what was going on. During these troubles, Peter Manago said to me, just do your job, which is what I tried to do. And what happened in Argentina was that people did not do their job. The journalists didn't do their job, the judges didn't do their job, and the military decided to murder people. We constantly sermonized against them, telling them what was happening in Italy, where Italy was facing the same problem of terrorism. And instead of dealing within the law, they went outside the law. They became even worse than the very worst terrorists. I'd like to tell you a little bit about this film, which I've not seen. Ed, that report was magnificent. I mean, They got everything, they understood everything. In this country that had this terrible silence, unbelievable silence, and this country where people closed their eyes. You could see people being picked up in the streets. Eventually, everybody knew somebody who'd been taken away. Many of them were totally innocent, a lot of them were not, but there was no way of knowing. There was no way of knowing when you were taken inside what would happen to you. I was very fortunate in that they took me inside once, and there I saw their badge. Their badge was a swastika on the wall, that size, when they took me into the cells. I visited that place once before with one of our great, he was our editor, one of our editors, great city editor, Andrew Graham Ewell, because they came for us. This was before the coup, and they took us away. And I insisted on going with him, which was wonderful, because I had a preview of the prison, where we heard the cries of the people being tortured, and they put on a radio to drown it out. That very short visit, I had a record. I was out of that jail so quickly because they wanted to get me out of there, which I was rather sad about, because I thought if I could stay a bit longer, I could draw more attention to Argentina. But, I mean, to see that, the swastika on the wall, it's the first thing that you see when you're taken into this terrible place. Imagine if you're Jewish and you see that swastika, and underneath they wrote Nazi nationalismo, Nazi nationalism. What we all needed to do at that time was, in some way or other, to say something, and there was a total silence. I used to pray that one of the august newspapers, one of the big news, would at least publish a letter from somebody. They didn't. And that must never, ever happen again. In Argentina, the nunca más must apply to all of us. We must never, ever allow this to happen again. The reason for this film, which I haven't seen it, I don't know how it is. The report I remembered is that wonderful report which heartened me because of the support of the Inter-American Press Association. It meant a tremendous amount, because one had no support. One felt very lonely at times. This film came about because Jason, who's from Australia, from Perth, Australia, he's traveled the world quite a bit. He's a little bit older than he looks, not much older. And he came to Argentina first as an exchange student. As many people do, he fell in love with Argentina. It's a wonderful country. It's a country you fall in love with. For good or ill. Probably you wish you didn't fall in love and you could fall out of love sometimes. Because it's a difficult country. He came, then he came back to Argentina after being a student there in the south, near Bariloche, in a little bit further south. He came back and went to work at the Herald. And when he went to work at the Herald, he heard of this, what the Herald was like in those days. And so he'd been curious, as people in Argentina earlier were incurious, they had no interest. He started to look around and he found these people. The people who in Ed's report were referred to as the mad mothers of Plaza de Mayo, las madres locas de Plaza de Mayo. And he started to go and interview them. And he heard this story of what the Herald, thanks to the support again from Charleston, consistently, with no drama, the idea, do your job. Careful, be careful, but do your job. No question of, you'll get closed down, you'll get bombed. We were careful. We were incredibly careful in those circumstances. And so Jason started to meet people who told him a story that has not been told properly, certainly not on film. Bits and pieces of it. A lot of people would like to suppress the story of what the Herald did. And so Jason called me up and told me what he was about and would I help. And I said, of course, I'd be delighted to help. It's a wonderful thing to do. Because one, it honors so many people. It honors the Inter-American Press Association, everybody who stands for freedom of the press. It honors the Manigault family, particularly Peter Manigault. It honors you all. And it also honors the mothers of Plaza de Mayo, who were heroic women. They were mothers who, thank God, you can't tell a mother, oh, I'm sorry. As sometimes the military said, your son must have been in something, or your daughter must have been doing something that was wrong. Por algo será. And they disappeared, and they searched and searched and searched and searched. Now, I'm very proud to say that at the Herald, we were affected as human beings. And we said to ourselves, this is a human problem, and these are human lives, and possibly we can save some. And we did. We managed to save lives. That's the one thing that I take out of that experience that means something to me. I have friends now who've come out of this terrible ESM place, this terrible torture place where 3,000 people were taken through it, and then they were disappeared, because finally the military found a good way to disappear people, at least they thought they had, by pumping them with, making them unconscious and then taking them out of airplanes and throwing them into the sea. So they were the real disappeared. And so now we come to the point where I think all that must be remembered consistently. We must not forget. We must not forget that. And I think if this film helps to do that, that will be absolutely wonderful. I'd like Jason to say a few words. I feel very grateful, as I do to Ed, as I do to all of you here, for this opportunity to tell you something about that could happen again. That we have this wonderful phrase, which was Sabater, one of our great writers, said, nunca más. This must never happen again. And we must do our utmost to see that it doesn't happen again anywhere, anyhow. Similar things are happening in Latin America today, which sometimes look very much like that. But that's why we're here. This is our major task as journalists, as members of the IAPA. I'd ask Jason to come up, say a few words, if you would, Jason. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests and members of the Inter-American Press Association. My name is Jason McNamara, and I have the very big honor of introducing to you a project that I'm working on in the form of a 20-minute work-in-progress reel. It's a feature-length documentary that I'm making with a small team of young filmmakers from the Universidad de Buenos Aires, UBA, about the life and work of Robert Cox and, of course, the Buenos Aires Herald as a newspaper. For some of you, Robert is a friend. For some of you, he's a colleague, un caballero inglés, or just Bob. For others, he's a husband, he's a father, a grandfather. For me personally, and for many others, including, I assume, many of you here tonight, he is a true hero. And I'll explain why I'm very overwhelmed. I've been working on this for a long time, and it's a very difficult story to tell. An absolute warrior of press freedom, a defender of human dignity, and I would like to also mention some of the journalists who disappeared in Argentina in that time, and also in particular pay special attention to the people that worked with Bob. I think this Bob certainly doesn't like the story to be just about him, and I understand that because he had a great team of journalists working at the Herald with him who did so many incredible things. There's little I want to say about the snippet of the film that you're about to see. I think it might speak for itself. As its director, I'm very honored to be able to speak here and also be in the company of the entire Cox family. It's a very big honor to be able to share part of their lives, which is quite dark and difficult to relive for them. So thank you very much for your support and your trust. And I would also like to take the opportunity to honor the late Peter Manigault, whose powerful role in this story I think is perhaps lost a little bit in the mess and the chaos that happened in Argentina at that time. Had it not been for Peter's courage and his support of his editor in Buenos Aires, I think we can safely say that several lives would not have been saved. And certainly the world would not have found out so quickly about what the military and the police forces in Argentina were up to, which was, as you all know, unfathomable. So I would like to dedicate this film to Peter. May he rest in peace. And I would also like to say a quick thank you to his son, Pierre, and the Inter-American Press Association more broadly for allowing me to speak here this evening. The apple clearly doesn't fall far from the tree when it comes to real and genuine support for projects about press freedom. And that's ultimately what our project is all about. And on that note, before the technical team presses play, I would like to draw your attention to some brochures that are at the back of the room near the door that you came through. This is an entirely independent project. That's why I'm feeling a little bit overwhelmed, because I've literally spent pretty much every waking moment of the last 15 months working on this project, and to be able to share it with you tonight is a very big deal for me. As an independent project, we need the support of individuals and organizations, not only to keep our independence, but also, and we also know how difficult that is in Argentina to keep your independence, as some of you may know, but also to get our film to the big screen, which is where I think the story of Bob and the Herald really deserves to be. So you can find the brochure at the back of the room. It has information about the film and also about ways you can help us out in our attempts to get the film released by about April next year. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy the very first screening of our film titled
Thank you very, very much. I had not seen the film, and it was very powerful for me to see all that again, and it seemed like some other person. If anybody wants to, I don't know whether anybody wants to ask any questions. I don't think it's the time, but if anybody does, by all means go ahead. I mean, you know, it's like, I think the film is so great, astonishingly real, that, you know, it's like when you hear a wonderful piece of music, you don't feel like applauding, you wait. But I say, I'll be available if anybody wants to ask me, or if anybody does now. But I think we should have dinner. Do you? Pierre, would you like to say something?
I will only add that, well, there's not much I can add to the film or to that story at all, but I will say that, as Jason mentioned in the back of the room, he's got his brochure about the film, and his, and, you know, of course, he and I, and I assume others would love your support on his ability to continue producing it. We also, I need to say that, which hasn't been mentioned yet tonight, that as Bob pointed out earlier, this is a story that he felt he was never able to tell. And luckily for him and for the world and for all of us, his son, David, who is here with us tonight, wrote a tremendous book of his father and of their family during this incredible experience. And it's in the back also. It's a book that our company published several years ago. It was the first book we published after we created a book publishing division. And it's called Dirty Secrets, Dirty War by David Cox, Bob's son. And if you haven't seen that, I would recommend that you do and you read it. It's an amazing account of the story. And now we invite you to have dinner. We've got various stations set up, I think, along the sides of the room, and as you can help yourselves and have some dinner. And then after that, we will pretty soon get around to the awards ceremony. Thank you.